It was a chilly December evening, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and cinnamon. The mall was buzzing with the usual holiday chaos. People rushing from store to store, children tugging at their parents, their voices blending into a sea of excitement. In the middle of it all stood Grace, a single mother, holding tightly to her 8-year-old son, Noah. It had been a rough year, but Grace had promised Noah that they would have a special Christmas this time. She was determined to give him the joy he deserved, even if it meant stretching her budget and battling the madness of last-minute shopping. Noah tugged on her sleeve, eyes wide with wonder as they approached the massive Santa display near the center of the mall. The jolly man in the red suit was surrounded by a crowd of children, but something about him made Grace uneasy. He was a bit too old, his face pale and wrinkled under a fake beard that looked more like a rag than a costume. His eyes, though, were what unsettled her most. Too bright, too intense, as if he were staring right through her. "Mom, can we take a picture with Santa?" Noah asked, his voice filled with excitement. Grace hesitated, but then nodded. "Sure, sweetie, just be quick." They waited in line, the sound of Christmas music playing in the background as the mall's artificial snowflakes fell gently from the ceiling. Noah was bouncing on his heels, already planning what he would ask Santa for this year. Grace, however, couldn't shake the growing sense of discomfort. Every time she looked up, the mall Santa's gaze seemed fixed on her. Finally, it was their turn. Grace encouraged Noah to sit on Santa's knee, offering him a warm smile. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as the man's cold hand touched her shoulder, guiding her to stand beside them. She stiffened but forced a smile. "Ho, ho, ho," the Santa bellowed, his voice too deep, too raspy. "What can I get for you, little one?" Noah eagerly rattled off his list, a new bike, some Legos, a puppy. But Santa wasn't looking at him. His attention was fully on Grace now, his gaze lingering on her face, her body, in a way that felt wrong. "You're looking lovely tonight, dear," Santa said, his voice low and smooth. Grace froze. She forced a smile, but something inside her screamed to get away. Noah was oblivious, chatting happily about his wishes, but Grace felt a chill run down her spine as Santa's hand subtly slid down her back. It was so quick, so casual that she almost convinced herself it hadn't happened. "Thank you," she said, trying to sound polite, but her voice wavered. She quickly grabbed Noah's hand and pulled him away from the creepy man, her heart pounding in her chest. They didn't speak much as they made their way out of the mall. Noah was too caught up in his excitement, but Grace's mind raced. What had just happened? Was she overreacting? It didn't matter. She wasn't going to let it ruin their evening. They would get home, have hot cocoa, and forget all about it. But when they reached their front door, Grace's blood ran cold. There, wedged in the crack of the door, was a small, crumpled piece of paper. She knelt down to pick it up, her hands shaking. The note read, "I'll be watching. You can't hide from me." Grace's breath caught in her throat. Her stomach turned as she recognized the handwriting. It was almost too neat, too deliberate. She had seen it before on the back of the picture Noah had drawn earlier that year, when he had written a note to Santa. A note that had been discarded. A note that the Santa at the mall could have seen. Her heart pounded. She grabbed Noah's hand and pulled him into the house, locking the door behind them. The warmth of the living room felt suffocating, the silence unbearable. "Mom, what's wrong?" Noah asked, his voice trembling now, sensing the change in the air. I don't know, sweetheart," Grace whispered, trying to steady her breath. "But we're going to be okay." She immediately dialed the police, her voice trembling as she explained the situation. The officer on the other end of the line assured her they would send someone over right away. Less than an hour later, the police arrived. They took the note and asked a few questions, but there was no sign of the man. They checked the mall's surveillance footage, and sure enough, they found him, standing outside the Santa booth, his eyes locked on Grace the entire time. They didn't know who he was or how he had gotten so close, but the officers assured Grace they would investigate. The police were able to track down the mall's Santa. He turned out to be a local man with a history of inappropriate behavior, someone who had been on the radar for months. He had been banned from working at other malls before, but somehow he had slipped through the cracks. The note? It was just a sick game to him. He never returned, and as far as Grace knew, he never would. But the fear didn't leave her. Every time she looked over her shoulder, every time she saw a mall Santa, her stomach twisted with the memory of that night. Grace wasn't sure who she feared more, the man in the red suit, or the part of her that felt vulnerable, so exposed in that moment. She wasn't sure if it would ever leave her, that gnawing feeling. But one thing was certain: her world had been forever changed. It was Christmas Eve, and young Elliot couldn't have been more excited. He lay wide awake in his cozy little bed, staring at the soft glow of the Christmas tree lights dancing across his walls. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards as his parents moved around, getting ready for bed. Elliot was determined to stay awake, hoping to catch a glimpse of Santa Claus when he came to deliver presents. But sleep soon claimed him, his eyelids growing heavy under the weight of Christmas joy and exhaustion. The sound of a door creaking woke him up with a jolt. His heart pounded in his chest, and he froze, listening intently. It wasn't his parents. This was a different sound. Elliot cautiously turned his head toward the living room where the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree illuminated the dark space. At first, he thought it was a dream, but then he heard it again. A soft shuffle, followed by the sound of something heavy being moved. Confused and nervous, Elliot squinted into the dark. His breath hitched when he saw a figure standing by the tree. The man was dressed in a red Santa suit, complete with a fake white beard that hung almost to his waist. Elliot's first instinct was to smile. He was about to see Santa Claus. But there was something about the way the man moved that didn't feel right. Santa was supposed to be jolly, right? But this man didn't seem jolly at all. The figure bent down by the tree, rummaging through the pile of presents that had been carefully placed under it. Elliot could hear the crinkling of wrapping paper as the man greedily tore through the gifts. A sickening chill ran down Elliot's spine. Something about the way the man handled the presents felt wrong. He wasn't being gentle as Santa should have been. He was ripping and tearing, as though he was stealing, not delivering. Panic surged in Elliot's chest. This was not Santa Claus. This was an intruder, someone who had broken into their house, and the man was taking what was rightfully theirs. The boy tried to stay as still as possible, hoping the stranger wouldn't hear him. His thoughts raced as he thought about his parents, fast asleep upstairs. They would never know in time. But Elliot was alone in the house with this man, and fear gripped him tightly. Suddenly, the man froze. He turned slowly, and Elliot could see the stranger's eyes through the holes in the white beard. They were dark, cold, like two empty pits. The man's eyes locked onto Elliot's, and the boy's heart stopped. The figure didn't say a word, but a sinister smile curled up under the fake beard. Elliot's entire body trembled with terror. The man took a slow, deliberate step toward him, his boots making a soft thud against the wooden floor. Elliot felt the weight of his fear settle over him like a blanket, his breath shallow. But something inside him refused to let go of the will to fight. The presents were not his to take. This man could not win. With a trembling voice, Elliot whispered, "What do you want?" The stranger didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached out to grab one of the presents near the tree. Elliot's heart pounded in his ears, but something clicked in his mind. If he stayed silent, the man might take everything. This wasn't just about presents. It was about something far worse. Summoning all the courage he could muster, Elliot screamed as loud as he could, "Help! Someone, help!" The sound shattered the silence of the night. The intruder's eyes widened, and for a split second, his grip on the present faltered. His entire body tensed, and he spun around, panic flooding his face. In a blur of motion, the man dropped the gift and bolted for the door. Elliot's scream echoed through the house, but by the time his parents rushed downstairs, the man was already gone, vanished into the night. Elliot was left trembling, his pulse racing, but relieved. His parents found him standing by the tree, eyes wide with shock. He quickly told them everything, how the man in the Santa suit had come into their home, how he'd been so close to taking everything they had. His mother hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes as she assured him he was safe now. But deep down, Elliot knew this wasn't just about stolen presents. It was about how fear could take hold, even when you least expected it. The police came, but by then there was nothing to find. No footprints, no trace of the man who had so coldly entered their home. But every Christmas after that, Elliot couldn't shake the image of the dark eyes peering through the Santa suit. He never looked at Santa the same way again. And every Christmas Eve, as the night grew still and silent, he couldn't help but wonder, was the man still out there wearing that same suit, waiting to strike again? Not all who wear the guise of Santa Claus bring joy and cheer. Some bring only fear. The Christmas lights flickered again, casting a strange, unsettling glow across the dark street. The kind of flicker that seemed deliberate, like a signal, a sign. It wasn't the first time it happened. It had been going on for weeks now. But tonight, as I stood by my window, staring across at my neighbor's house, something felt off. The usual festive cheer was gone. It was just cold, mechanical. My gaze locked on the house of Mr. Wilder, the man who lived next door. He was a quiet, older man, hardly ever seen outside, and when he was, it was only for the briefest of moments. At first, I didn't think much of the flickering lights. Maybe it was a faulty bulb, or perhaps a power surge, a problem anyone might have. But tonight, the pattern of blinking seemed deliberate, almost menacing. I couldn't explain it, but I felt drawn to it, like something was pulling me to look closer. Curiosity gnawed at me as I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The whole street was quiet. Too quiet. The snow had fallen softly, blanketing everything in a layer of white, and the only sounds were the occasional distant rumble of a car passing by. But there, behind Mr. Wilder's house, shadows danced unnaturally. Something wasn't right. I walked out onto my porch, hoping for a better angle. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The lights blinked again, and this time, I noticed something more. There was a sound. A faint, soft sound, almost like a cry. It was muffled at first, barely noticeable beneath the hum of the Christmas lights. But then it grew louder, clearer. It sounded like a child, desperate. My stomach churned. I glanced around, half expecting someone to appear behind me, but the street was still empty. I don't know why I didn't call the police right away. Maybe I thought it was just my imagination running wild. Maybe I thought I was overreacting. But when the crying persisted, something snapped. This wasn't normal. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to go over there, see for myself. The walk across the snow-covered lawn felt longer than it should have. As I approached Mr. Wilder's house, I saw no sign of movement inside, no one at the windows, no lights beyond the flicker of the Christmas decorations. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I knocked again, harder this time, my heart pounding in my chest. Nothing. And then I heard it, louder now, crying. It was coming from inside, unmistakable. A child, scared and alone, pleading for help. I didn't hesitate. I rushed to the side of the house, towards the basement window. The cries were louder here. They were raw, desperate, a small voice sobbing for mercy. I scrambled to find a way in. The basement window was slightly ajar, so I pried it open, my hands trembling, and crawled through. The air inside was damp, stale, filled with the scent of mold and decay. What I saw as I made my way down the creaky stairs was a nightmare. A small boy, no more than 8 or 9, was curled up in the corner of the basement, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. His clothes were ragged, his hair matted with sweat. He looked like he hadn't seen the light of day in weeks. The sight of him sent a shiver through me, a cold, creeping feeling that I couldn't shake. Before I could move, a voice called from the top of the stairs. "Well, well, what have we here?" Mr. Wilder. I froze, my body stiff with fear. The man who lived next door, always so quiet, so withdrawn. But now his voice was like ice, and his presence was suffocating. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. My words stuck. The boy on the floor whimpered again, and I knew, deep in my gut, what I had stumbled upon. Mr. Wilder descended the stairs slowly, his eyes dark with something sinister. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice cold and detached, like he had rehearsed this moment. But the words didn't matter. I was already backing away, my heart pounding as the terror rose in my chest. Without thinking, I grabbed the boy's arm and pulled him toward me, my mind screaming for help. Mr. Wilder didn't move to stop me. He just watched, his cold eyes never leaving my face. I didn't wait another second. I ran. I made it to the front yard before I could even think of what to do next. I stumbled back to my house, breathless, my heart pounding in my ears. I called the police. The officer on the other end didn't waste any time. They were here within minutes, a rush of flashing lights and heavy boots on the snow. They barged into Mr. Wilder's house, and within seconds, they came back out, dragging him away in cuffs. The boy was taken to safety, wrapped in a blanket, still trembling, still unsure of what had just happened to him. They told me later that he had been kept locked in the basement for weeks, fed only scraps, and subjected to horrors none of us could imagine. Mr. Wilder was arrested for kidnapping, but I couldn't stop thinking about the lies he had hidden behind his quiet facade, about the Christmas lights that flickered like a warning. The whole neighborhood was shaken. We had been blind to the darkness lurking right next door. The decorations still hung on his house, but no one would ever see them the same way again. Every time the lights blinked, a chill would run down our spines, a reminder of the secret that had been hiding behind them all along. It had been a long week for Elena and Kai. The two of them had spent their Friday evening just like any other, curled up on the couch, watching a movie and enjoying each other's quiet company. The sun had long since set, and the house was filled with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional crackle from the TV. The warm glow of the living room light flickered gently, casting long shadows across the floor. Everything felt peaceful. Too peaceful. Elena, nestled in the corner of the couch, glanced at Kai, who was munching on some popcorn. He caught her gaze and smiled, but something in his expression made her feel uneasy, though she couldn't place why. She shrugged it off, trying to focus on the movie, but a cold chill slowly began to creep up her spine. There was a sound, a faint scraping noise, barely noticeable at first, like something scraping against wood. She froze. Kai didn't seem to hear it, absorbed in the movie. She listened closely, and it came again, louder this time. A dragging noise coming from beneath the floor, from somewhere deep inside the house. Her heart thudded in her chest. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Kai paused the movie, glancing at her with furrowed brows. He hadn't heard anything. He listened for a moment, the room tense in silence, but the sound had stopped. "It's probably just the house settling," he said dismissively, reaching for more popcorn. "You know how old this place is? Don't worry." But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The silence returned, but it felt wrong, like the house was holding its breath, waiting. The noises continued, growing louder and more deliberate. There was no denying it now. Something was in the crawl space beneath the house. Elena felt her skin prickling with dread. "No, this isn't right, Kai. It's coming from under the floorboards." Her voice shook with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Okay, Kai said, standing up slowly. "I'll check it out." He gave her a reassuring smile, though his eyes betrayed the uncertainty beneath his calm demeanor. Elena watched as he walked towards the hallway, his footsteps echoing through the otherwise silent house. Kai knelt by the door that led to the crawl space. The lock was rusty, and the wood around it creaked in protest as he pried it open. He grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and shone it into the narrow, suffocating darkness beneath the house. At first, he saw nothing. But as he swept the beam of light across the ground, his breath caught in his throat. There, on the far side of the crawlspace, was something moving. It was a shadow, but not like the others. This one was solid, dark, and unmistakably human. The shape shifted, a figure standing just out of sight, barely visible in the flickering light. Kai stepped back, his heart hammering in his chest. "Elena!" he called out, his voice strained. "There's someone down there. Someone's been living here." Before he could say anything more, Elena ran into the hallway, her face pale with fear. "What do you mean? What's happening?" "I don't know," Kai said, his mind racing. "But there's definitely someone, maybe a squatter. We need to be careful." The house felt like it was closing in on them. Every small creak of the floorboards above them sent waves of panic through their bodies. They retreated into the bedroom, locking the door behind them, but the sounds kept coming. Scratching, dragging, the low whisper of someone moving in the walls. Elena's breath was shallow, her hands clammy with sweat. "What do we do, Kai? What if they come in here? What if they hurt us?" "We won't let that happen," he replied firmly, though his voice shook. "We're going to fight back if we have to." Suddenly, the door rattled, hard. Someone or something was trying to get in. The rattling grew louder, accompanied by desperate thuds against the wood. Kai bolted to his feet, grabbing a heavy lamp from the nightstand. Elena followed his lead, taking a nearby metal chair, clutching it like a weapon. The door splintered. A hand, pale and skeletal, reached through the widening crack. Kai and Elena didn't hesitate. Together, they charged. Kai swung the lamp with all his strength, knocking the hand back, while Elena slammed the chair into the door, forcing it shut. The intruder screamed, a guttural, inhuman sound that chilled them both to the bone. But then, as quickly as it had started, the noises stopped. The house grew still once more, eerily silent. The couple stood there, hearts racing, breathing hard, listening for any sound that might betray the intruder's movements. The minutes stretched into eternity before Kai pulled out his phone and dialed the police. The police arrived within minutes, taking the intruder away. They found signs of forced entry in the crawl space and evidence that the person had been living there for months, stealing food, moving through the walls at night, hiding in the dark corners of their own home. As the police took the squatter away, Elena and Kai sat on the couch, trembling in each other's arms. The sense of safety they had once taken for granted had been shattered. The quiet of their home, once comforting, now felt suffocating. The ordeal was over, but the memory of it lingered, forever etched into the walls of their house, reminding them that sometimes the true horrors don't lie in the dark corners of the world, but in the very walls that surround us.